This is Imran in New York, within my humble opinion. I'd like to discuss the bailout of the US economy that is a topic of discussion everywhere around the world. Not only is the US economy in a severe recession, it is also talked about as if a depression might be upon us. I personally do not think that any kind of depression is in the works. However, the economy is still in dire straits. Apparently, we went into a recession in December of 2007. Now, in the past, recessions have tended to last between 8 and 16 months, so we can possibly expect to see a recovery in April of this year. My personal feeling is that in addition to this being a deeper recession than before, even though it may not be April, it may be a little longer before we actually see the signs of a recovery, the fact that we have a new and actually finally a capable president taking over in the White House will have some positive impact also. Additionally, the fact that we are throwing money at the problem is actually a problem in my humble opinion. The problem is that we are using taxpayer-funded money to throw money at industries that were mismanaged to destruction. The first of these was the US banking and financial services industry. The worst part is that despite $2 trillion, that's T for trillion dollars, that American taxpayer money has been given to banks and other mismanaged organizations, we still have no accounting or accountability of what happened to that money. So we need to get to the bottom of $2 trillion that seem to have just disappeared, given away by Hank Paulson and George Bush and his company of really crazy and incompetent friends. Second thing is that we're trying to bail out industries that really have no business being bailed out. For example, the dying dinosaurs of Detroit. I am not looking for the deaths of the automobile industry in the United States, but I am not for throwing away even $1 billion of American taxpayer money to go to an industry that has been mismanaged for 30 years. In the meantime, $17 billion has been given to the automakers, in particular to GM, Ford and Chrysler, to come up with a plan of what they will do with more money that they will need. So in effect, that's almost like your employer giving you a bonus and saying, why don't you take 3 months to figure out how you can be less incompetent and can be less destructive to my business? And then I'll give you some more money to help get your act together. How come you and I cannot get that kind of bailout? Anyway, what is more important is we need to come out with alternate options. And one of my ideas is that we do a bailout in which we help us help the US, and I will talk about that in the next segment. This is Imran in New York within my humble opinion. In a previous segment, we discussed what is ailing the US economy and what some of the solutions that have been poorly tried have been. Today, I am proposing a bailout of the US economy, but in a totally different way. I am proposing that we help us help the US. How we do that is the following. Instead of giving $2 trillion to banks, or 17 or 30 billion dollars to automakers that still have no plan on how to stay in business, I think what we need is a bailout of the American consumer. We need a bailout of Americans. Let us help us to help the US get out of this recession. How I propose doing that is the following. In simple terms, people have talked about, hey, why don't you give the money back to the citizens? Why don't you give the bailout money to consumers? I think we need a little more detail on how that can be done. My proposal is quite simple. What we need is for the American government, which includes the Fed and the Treasury, that is giving away our taxpayer money to these banks and other poorly managed organizations, to put that money into an entity that is like a bank, or is a bank run by the US government for a limited period of time. This bank would issue credit cards. Just like Visa, MasterCard or American Express, these credit cards would be issued by this government-owned bank. The credit cards would be issued only to American citizens or green card holders who are taxpayers and legally in this country. Each credit card will have a specific simple limit. The simple limit will be based upon an example of $3,000 for individuals and $5,000 for families if a family gets a single credit card. Plus, the credit limit will include 3 times what you paid in taxes in the last 3 to 5 years. For example, if you paid $5,000 per year in taxes for the last 5 years, you could get a credit card of about $28,000. Now, this credit card would not be like a typical credit card that you use forever and is revolving credit. This would be a very short-term, very targeted credit card. you would get this credit card, for example, on February 1. You have 90 days to use the maximum money that you are allowed to spend, so that the money goes right into the economy in a 30 to 90 day cycle. And the immediate benefit of that is that the economy will get that jump start, almost like a CPR, as opposed to doing this trickle down theory that we will hire lots of engineers to build green cars, or we will build lots of roads and then those roads will cause companies to hire engineers or doctors and all that kind of stuff. We do not have time for trickle down. So these credit cards will go into effect right away. You will have 90 days to use the money on that credit card because it's not a revolving limit credit card. Once you have this money can be used at any merchant who accepts credit cards or is willing to accept this credit card. I would even suggest that the US government have MasterCard, Visa, and American Express compete for the business of managing this credit card program. After all, they would get to handle trillions of dollars in exchange for the services that they already provide to merchants, for an infrastructure they already have in place. They would get hundreds of millions of new customers. On top of that, they will charge and get the transaction and merchant fees that they get from merchants. However, the condition will be that they cannot charge the 3 to 5% discount rate to merchants. What they will have to live with will be 0.5% or less, so that merchants can pass on that 3 to 5% of credit card charges that they used to pay to consumers in lower prices. So not only would we be giving money to the consumers to spend on American businesses here in America, we would be asking American merchants to reduce the price of their goods a little bit by passing on the savings of the credit card discount to the merchants, to the consumers. What this does is it puts trillions of dollars into the US economy right away, and it's money given by American government to American taxpayers based upon taxes that they had previously paid in previous years. On top of that, instead of giving money to the likes of GM or Ford or Chrysler, this credit card would be valid on any American merchant who accepts it. So if I have a $25,000 credit card, for example, and I want to buy an American car for $25,000, it's up to GM and Ford and Chrysler to accept that credit card so I can spend my money on buying that car. So I would be bailing out the US auto industry or the real estate industry or anything else that needs the money without having to be giving money to companies that are dying dinosaurs of Detroit, as I call them. Now we come to the trillion or multi-trillion dollar question of how this money will be paid back to the American government. That's quite simple. First of all, just like any other credit card, we will be paying an interest on these credit cards also. The difference will be, unlike the American banks, the sleazy American banks that get 0% money from the government, our money, our government gives to these banks at 0% interest. And then they, if they lend it at all, will give it to us at 15, 20, 25, even 30% interest. On top of that, they will hit you with late charges and over the limit charges to make sure that you never get out of debt. So it's time to give this money with interest from the American government to the American taxpayer. Let the American taxpayer spend it on American businesses to create American jobs. And when it's time to repay, we American taxpayers and credit card holders will pay 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% interest on this money and give it to the government back in the form of monthly payments, just like we do with any other credit card, in addition to having the option of returning more of this money on our annual taxes in the years to come. So for example, if you were paying $5,000 in taxes, that's how you had earned this money, that's how you had gotten this money from the government. In future years, in the next 3, 5 or 10 years, you can pay $2,000 or $3,000 more every year on taxes to return this money. So this is not higher taxes you would be paying. You would simply be paying back with your annual taxes the money you would have borrowed from the government to jumpstart the economy so that your job is safe, your standard of living is safe, American jobs are created, American merchants can stay in business, and American sleazy banks can be driven out of business unless they get their act together and have to compete with this kind of program, so that we are not giving multi-million-dollar bonuses to people who ran their banks into the ground, do not lend money to the good consumers that are out there, and are screwing them with interest rates that are through the roof. Tell me what you think about this plan to bail out the US economy. Help us, help US. That's what I say. It should be our motto. What's your take? Let me know. This is Imran with In My Humble Opinion, signing off.